Over the past several decades, Pakistan's political reality has operated on a razor's edge, democracy flickering, the military a persistent shadow power, and constitutional amendments serving more often as tools for entrenchment than for reform. At the heart of this complex dance sits Article 243, that modest-sounding provision in the Pakistani constitution which vests the supreme command of the armed forces in the president, but through convention and repeated extra-constitutional interventions, lies squarely in the fists of whoever wears the uniform of Chief of Army Staff. Recent whispers, and some more public reports, of proposed amendments to Article 243 carry implications far beyond legal technicality. These amendments reportedly seek to cement the Army Chief's centrality, allowing direct intervention in governance, protecting incumbents from prosecution or removal, and authorizing extensions and powers previously checked by Parliament, the Prime Minister, or the Supreme Court. And whether by design or by coincidence, the timing and content are uncannily tailored to General Asim Munir, a man whose tenure signals not just the latest cycle of military dominance, but potentially a new phase in the personalization of power at the summit of Pakistan's state apparatus. To understand why these amendments matter, and the shape of the political contest they ignite, it's critical to look not only at legal language, but at the lived reality of Pakistan's civil-military history, the fates of previous army chiefs, and the survival strategies of authoritarian leaders across South Asia. It's a history marked by ambition, maneuver, tactical unity, sudden collapse, and sometimes, just sometimes, unexpected democratic resurgence. The Playbook of Power, Article 243 and beyond. Article 243 is a battleground. On paper, it grants the President command of the armed forces, but over time, the process of appointment and removal of the Army Chief has shifted decisively toward the Prime Minister, and in critical moments has become a tool for the military itself to override civilian supremacy. Amendments or clarifications have generally coincided with moments of institutional stress, a government seeking to assert dominance, or a powerful military leader seeking to lock in tenure. The rumored amendments circulating in Islamabad today are unprecedented in scope. They would enable direct intervention by the Army Chief in matters deemed critical to the security and integrity of the state. They might create procedural hurdles for removal, require supermajorities in Parliament, or judiciary review for any involuntary change. Some drafts reportedly even envision legal immunity for actions undertaken in national interest. For General Munir, who rose quietly but quickly through the ranks, these changes seem custom-built, a legal architecture for potentially indefinite rule, shielded both from civilian interference and from rivals within the military itself. How did we get here? The anatomy of authoritarianism. Pakistan has cycled through democracy and dictatorship since its birth. Each military ruler has entered office with a promise: stability, reform, eradication of corruption, but left with a legacy of political stagnation, economic stress, and a weakening of civilian institutions. Ayub Khan, Pakistan's first major military dictator, seized power in 1958 against a backdrop of instability and infighting among the civilian elite. He presided over a period of relative growth, but soon succumbed to his own centralization of authority and suppression of dissent. When popular unrest finally forced his resignation in 1969, the baton was handed not back to civilian hands, but to General Yahya Khan, whose own tenure saw the disastrous 1971 war and the secession of East Pakistan as Bangladesh. The myth of the stabilizing general was broken by sheer scale of national trauma. Then came Zia-ul-Haq, whose rule from 1977 to 1988 fundamentally reshaped Pakistan's political and religious landscape. Zia ousted elected Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto in a brutal coup, later overseeing his execution in controversial circumstances. Zia's Islamization drive, manipulation of constitutional amendments, and suppression of dissent were accompanied by skillful use of military courts, intelligence services, and installation of technocratic allies. He ruled for over a decade, outlasting presidents and prime ministers, but was killed in a mysterious plane crash in 1988. Zia's sudden demise delivered neither closure nor accountability. His legacy lived on through constitutional and religious reforms that still shape civil-military relations today. Pervez Musharraf's coup in 1999 followed a now familiar pattern: oust a prime minister, in his case, Nawaz Sharif, promise stability and anti-corruption, then broaden presidential power through clever referenda and amendments. Musharraf's era witnessed economic liberalization and brief media expansion, but his hold was always precarious. As judicial protests and the lawyers' movement grew in 2007, as the political opposition unified, and as Washington's support waned, Musharraf resigned in 2008 rather than face impeachment and the possibility of prosecution. His post-resignation career, self-imposed exile, brief return, legal cases, shows just how fleeting the security of the top job can be once both civilian and internal military alliances shift. Beyond Pakistan, South Asia has known similar scripts. Bangladesh's own coup era saw General Hussein Mohammad Ershad maintain power for 8 years before a mass popular movement ended his rule in 1990. In Myanmar, military rulers held near-absolute power for decades, only to retract or share rule when internal or external pressures, such as street protests, sanctions, or fatigue, reached critical mass. 3 lessons emerge again and again. Constitutional amendments often serve as temporary shields, not permanent solutions. Popular movements can still break authoritarian fortresses when they bridge social divides, and military rulers, however powerful, rarely exit by choice or legacy. Why personalize power now? The case of Asim Munir. General Asim Munir's tenure as army chief is marked both by the context of his rise and the logic of his rule. He entered the role after internal drama, emerging as the compromise candidate, but one with deep intelligence roots, strong logistical command, and a reputation for methodical consolidation rather than flamboyant execution. His initial months saw recalibration in civil-military relations, with political parties repeatedly forced into line and media space contractually limited. The proposed amendments to Article 243, if implemented, shift the landscape dramatically in Munir's favor. By vesting broad powers in the army chief, immunizing him against prosecution, and allowing almost automatic renewal or extension, they risk creating a legal fortress resembling Zia's martial law decrees, but calibrated for the digital age, and for a context where the military's economic and intelligence wings rival the civilian state in reach. But the risks for Munir are profound. History suggests that the moment a dictator attempts to monopolize power, until death, internal dissent begins brewing. Corps commanders, intelligence chiefs, and influential advisors may chafe under perpetual rule, forming alliances or waiting for a moment of crisis, economic, security, or even personal health to force a transition. The president for life aspiration, so tempting in the heat of consolidated rule, often dies on the rocks of military pragmatism and factional politics. How dictators fall, scenarios for Munir's exit. Removal of a powerful army chief is never simple, rarely legal, and almost always messy. The classic scenarios break down into several categories. Internal military, coup, factional revolt. Senior commanders or rival directorates, feeling marginalized or threatened, might plot Munir's early retirement, using either procedural means, health grounds, end of tenure, or, in worst-case scenarios, orchestrated leaks, scandals, or direct intervention. Pakistan's recent history has seen chiefs fall this way, either quietly or after public embarrassment. When Musharraf's support evaporated, it was a combination of internal military fatigue and coordinated pressure that forced him out. Popular protest and civil uprising. When Zia's regime ended in 1988, and when Musharraf faced mass street protests by lawyers, students, and opposition parties in 2007-08, public momentum made continued rule untenable, forcing either direct resignation or negotiated exit. Political parliamentary maneuver. In theory, an empowered parliament could amend the constitution to strip the army chief of his new prerogatives or force retirement through law. In practice, unless opposition parties unify and are willing to challenge the military head-on, with the public on their side, this pathway is blocked or risks violent backlash. External pressure. International sanctions, withdrawal of foreign military support, or diplomatic isolation can, in rare cases, tip the scales against an entrenched regime. These are double-edged swords. Foreign pressure can lead to intensified repression and anti-West nationalism, but with enough economic pain, even military regimes have bent, as with end of apartheid in South Africa or the KMT in Taiwan. Natural crisis or health. Sometimes fate intervenes, illness, accident, or rapid loss of support due to unfolding crises. A sudden economic collapse, a war gone wrong, or even a pandemic can destabilize power, making forced transition possible. Why do these cycles repeat? Pakistan's constitutional bottleneck is that the military is not only a security actor, but an economic stakeholder, a media controller, and through emergency and administrative law, a shadow government. Amendments like the ones proposed for Article 243 are both cause and effect of this. Reality: civilian institutions are regularly sidelined, judiciary is co-opted or curbed, and political parties are fragmented by arrest, exile, or inducement. Why do dictators rarely retire peacefully, and why are their rules so often extended until death? One answer lies in the absence of genuine power-sharing mechanisms. Democratic transitions rely on trust between institutions. Dictatorships, by their nature, are built on suspicion, concentration of power, and at worst, paranoia. Zia could not let go for fear of prosecution or revenge. Musharraf lingered, then was forced out when his network frayed. Even Ayub, who tried to engineer a civilian return, could not manage the violence his departure triggered. Is reform possible? For Pakistan, breaking the cycle requires more than rewriting Article 243. It requires restoring the independence of parliament and judiciary, encouraging social movements that cross ethnic and class lines, and building lasting coalitions willing to defend constitutional rule even against powerful military figures. Academic literature on democratic transitions is clear. Incremental reform rarely works. Meaningful change requires a crisis, a coalition, and a leadership ready to risk short-term uncertainty for long-term restoration. Regional context and future prospects. Pakistan is not alone in facing militarized constitutional amendments. Myanmar's military-drafted constitution allowed the army to seize direct control every time national security was threatened, resulting in cycles of elections and coups. Bangladesh still lives with the political legacy of its coup leaders, though civilian rule has stabilized. Even in places like Egypt, Thailand, or Turkey, constitutional manipulations by military or deep state actors often undermine democratic experiments, prolonging instability and polarization. For General Asim Munir, the temptation of indefinite rule via constitutional amendment carries real dangers. History is not on his side. Every dictator who has tried to rule until death has fallen, sometimes harshly, sometimes ignominiously, and rarely with any chance at crafting legacy. If removed by force or protest, he risks a brief transition period marked by uncertainty, division, and institutional trauma. Conclusion: fate and the road ahead. The fate of amendments to Article 243, and thus of General Munir's rule, will depend not only on his will, but on the resilience of Pakistan's social, political, and military networks. If amendments succeed without backlash, he could become, for a time, the unchallenged arbiter of Pakistan's future. But if history is a guide, and if institutions or the public unify, the system may shift, facing either partial democratization, another factional coup, or even the chaos that comes with regime collapse. In this tense moment, Pakistan stands at a crossroads familiar to every nation that has endured cycles of dictatorship, whether to amend the constitution for personal rule, risking stagnation and eventual crisis, or to resist, risking real uncertainty and change. Whoever sits at the top must decide not only how to wield power, but how and when to let go. And history shows, again and again, that no amendment is enough to guarantee the throne for life. The fate of Asim Munir, like those who came before, will be written not just in law, but in struggle, resistance, and the unpredictable winds of national history.